Hallo, Wingfee. Welkom in de live uitzending van Wingfee.
Vandaag
We're live.
een speciale gast.
Yes. We're going to do this broadcast in English today because we have a special guest out of Limerick, Ireland. I can call him Professor, I guess. Giuseppe Torre.
Hello.
And we're going to be talking about live coding, of course. And what is live coding? What is live if your code is already written on your editor, etc. And also he brought some examples. You can see this on our YouTube channel, Dago Sondervan YouTube. All right, welcome Giuseppe.
Thank you.
So we already had a long discussion here, but we're gonna restart our discussion here. So there is a debate in the live coding community. If you have a look at the ICLC, a lot of the performances, the code is pre-written, and there are some live coding community members who like this, and some don't like it at all. So, what is the advantage or disadvantage of using your code pre-written when you are performing?
Yeah. So, thanks for having me, first of all. Thanks, Dago. Thanks, everyone, for having me here at Radio Central. So live coding. So in the name live coding, there is the word live, and live means, okay, one can ask like what it means live. Now, many performers seems to interpret the word live as a way of coding in real time in front of an audience, and that seems to be a shared understanding. Now, where things get a bit more complicated is the reason, the rationale for using live. So what's the end purpose? Is the end goal to make music, or is the end goal to demonstrate some sort of process through advanced technical skills, the ability of developing and writing algorithms in front of an audience in real time? And
has that to do also a little bit with virtuosity then, in any kind of way?
In a certain sense as well. So it becomes like the live coder is not just a musician, or not primarily a musician, depends, as we will see now, the discussion, what it means a live coding performance. So as you were mentioning, Dago, the thing was that, so traditionally the live coding community seems to have stemmed out by the idea that, yes, we live code in front of, we project our own screen, and generally the idea, at least historically, was to start from a blank page.
Yes.
From
there was
scratch.
in the Top Lab manifesto.
Exactly.
You can see this. Just show your screens. It's like a hacker mentality, transparency.
Exactly. So we remain with that kind of culture, with the idea of sharing the screen, but what's appeared to be lost especially from the conference we have been last year. Was
The
this
ICLC was this
this
May,
summer.
I think in May or
It
something.
was June, May, or something like that. Yeah. It seems that there is a tendency in the live coding community now to not come on stage with a blank canvas, with a blank page, but we opening the laptop and projecting the laptop with pre-written code. And why is that done so? Why do people do that? Well, the idea is, again, connecting to the rationale, or actually more than the rationale, the teleology of the live coding. So what's the end goal? Is making music or is about writing code? Seems to be that the community now, at least from what we've seen at ICLC in Barcelona, seems to privilege the idea that we are making music. And so if the end goal is to make a music performance, then it becomes almost compulsory to come on stage with pre-written code, because otherwise, starting from a blank canvas, you have to start writing everything, and there are endless minutes of silence before the first bleep come to be seen and heard.
You could start maybe also from a minimal amount of code, like 2 lines, that you also already start making like a steady bass drum or something if you are in an algorithm. But the thing is, I really love the from scratch ideas, and also at the ICLC there was a very small part where they used this kind of technique still, the from scratch sessions. Because if you start from nothing or almost nothing, you can follow the process how the composer is thinking at the moment. If you see a screen full of code, then you cannot disguise what is doing at the moment or what is really inventing.
The kind of thinking does not develop on the fly, so you cannot follow. You are just prompted with this screen with lines and lines of code, and therefore it becomes almost impossible to follow the logic of the composer developing the performer, developing the performance in real time. True. As you mentioned, though, again, you mentioned, okay, you could start not perhaps with 100 line of codes, you could start with 2, so immediately as soon as you jump on stage, you have some beat going on. The problem is that even in that case, and the reason why many people don't do even that, they just start with hundreds of line of code, a pre-made performance basically, where then during the performance they change little things, is because even a simple beat after 4-8 repetition lose the attention of the listener. Loses the attention of the listener. So that's why people don't tend to not even do that. Now, I'm not an advocate of starting from scratch nor starting from hundreds of lines of code. I'm just sharing a thought for the rationale why
it's a debate.
Why is this happening? Well, this is happening, I think, is because it depends on the motivations for doing and engaging in live coding. If your motivation is to make music, then you couldn't care less to start from scratch. If your motivation is to show some kind of thinking, way of thinking live, a process happening in real time, then you would prefer to start from scratch. But
then
this kind of performance,
really more improvising. If you can compare to jazz, for instance, and you start a solo without that it's pre-practiced. There might be some analogies between those two ideas.
But exactly, and that breaks. But that we have to be aware that in that case we break kind of the way in which a music performance is constructed. So earlier on we were talking about the example of Jimi Hendrix. We wouldn't love a performance of seeing Jimi Hendrix trying to put the right finger on the right string to play a G major. We just enjoy seeing Jimi Hendrix playing the guitar,
even without knowing any chords.
Even without knowing any chords, but we see a direct response between his movement, the fingers movement, and the sound. By instead approaching a live coding performance by making things from scratch, then we also have to make the audience aware of the idea that here we are not just interested in a sonic environment.
No.
To a certain extent, the sonic environment becomes I wouldn't say less important, but as important as showing a reasoning, a way of reasoning, and a logic behind constructing something on the fly.
Yes.
A sort of perhaps action painting, like performance to a certain extent.
We had this comparison also with, we had a discussion with Fred de Blazer when we were doing, Andrew and I, it was like a live coding thing we were doing, but the AI was also involved, and Kasper had also made some AI tools that we were using. And he was very surprised because I start always from scratch, and it's like throwing some paint to the wall, but then you start sculpting it, and that's the nice idea. You start really from just throw some sounds in, and then you can structure it in like in beats or in chords or scales, and that's really adventurous. We might say. And some of the adventure starts to diminish. Maybe you take less chances that also things can go wrong, which is a tension bow that might be the really interesting goal to go for.
Absolutely.
Because as Andrew also mentioned, and we discussed this kind of stuff a lot of times, what then is the difference to come on stage with an Ableton and start launching some clips, and then the distance between this kind of performance and live coding starts to narrow.
Yeah, and that's also, it connects well with this idea of starting from scratch. So if we are really to question what does it really mean to start from scratch in the digital domain, right? So where do we start? It's a threshold. So yes, at Ableton Live, it's almost a strange form of obscurantism, because you see this kind of stuff moving like, I don't know, a knob, a fader, but you don't know what it's doing. What it's doing, perhaps it's doing nothing.
It might be the case.
It might not be.
In many live electronic performances, that is the case.
Yeah, exactly. But even when we do live coding, we certainly, even when we start our patch from scratch, it's not necessarily from scratch. There is already an engine, that is working in the background. There is the computer that is doing its job. So in the digital domain, to a certain extent, I mean, we never start from scratch. We are not building an operating system on the fly. We are not soldering circuits to make a CPU or anything.
We're not going on assembly.
Exactly. Although there are some people performing with assembly.
I would love to see that. Close to the metal. And soldering, I showed you.
And there are
live soldering.
There you go.
So you can. It depends on what range you want to improvise and also create your instrument. Because I mentioned to you also, and I was talking to Sam Aaron about this, and he also had the same opinion. We don't write Super Collider or Sound Engine on the fly.
We don't.
So there's always some form of abstraction. But in Overtone, you could write your synth definitions on the fly. And I told him that I did this, and I was like, no, don't do this. Because that might go horribly wrong and produce like... you could blow your speakers out.
And that's maybe the beauty of it. Let's blow the speaker. Maybe that could be another reason to do live coding. That's how to crash the computer.
Well, that's the idea. People don't... that's taking chances. That's also, if you go for like an improvised set from on the fly, then you're taking some chances, and your computer might indeed scratch. And it also happens in live performances, but then you see the audience cheering this instead of, this is a faulty performance because he crashed. No, it's the opposite. You took it to the border of what was possible.
I think to take it to the extreme, I'm yet to see a performance done in which, to end the performance, people type the command line remove / and just delete everything like from the root, like so, just crush the computer. I think
So like wipe out your hard drive.
yeah, not just wipe it all out. Like, that's it. Like
It's like a nuclear approach.
having the courage to actually crush it, like, and leave no trace of the existence of what you've done.
It's like the Buddhists, they make this beautiful painting. It looks a bit like this carpet, and they work like days on it, and then they swipe it.
That's it. We should do the same. Okay, for the next ICLC, maybe we do that kind of performance. Yeah.
Okay. Maybe we can also have a discussion, and I would also invite Andrew and Kasper to join this. We had a discussion about random, and also we are on a FM radio station here, and you like this a lot because what's the difference between analog and digital? We were also discussing, and what is true random.
Yeah. So here we touch upon a bit of the kind of research I do at the University of Limerick, and more in the philosophical space. Over a number of past years, I've been working precisely on the distinction of digital versus analog. This is a debate that somehow didn't get any more traction until recently. There have been some work now published again, especially in the philosophical domain, and people have starting to tackle the difference between analog and digital, because it's actually not fully understood, is not fully agreed upon what the distinction is. As a case in point would be the fact that in the history of the digital computers, there's no fixed date. Right? You can't say the digital was born in the 1938 with the, I can't remember the name of the computer there.
At that hour with that many seconds.
At that hours, and it's not. Now, philosophically speaking, the distinction between discrete and continuous comes from actually philosophy more than engineering. Although engineers have adopted to a certain extent, and comes from a philosophy debate in the 70s between Lewis and Goodman. There was a short debate there. Goodman came up the winner in that debate.
There was a winner.
There was a winner. But the thing is that the distinction, if we go by the distinction between discrete and continuous, it's not valid. Logically, it's not valid for the simple reason that an analog computer can work discretely, while a digital computer cannot work analog.
Cannot do this.
So that distinction is not entirely logical if one wants to follow that kind of debate. The other thing, many people say, okay, digital is about zeros and ones. That's not even true, because there is also ternary computers, which have 0, 1, and
quantum
2.
computers?
Now there is even quantum computers. Although quantum computers, if I can express an opinion, yes, they are born out of quantum theory and the quantum entanglement and all that kind of stories. But when they try to use that kind of knowledge or energy or whatever you want to call it, it boils down to zeros and ones.
Digital again. They have
digital
to,
again. They have to do and fall back into a kind of
so then it sounds a bit useless
of reality
in some kind of way.
But, well, I wouldn't go as far as saying it's useless, but I mean, it's been demonstrated they are really powerful. Okay,
for encryption also.
For encryption, for solving mathematical puzzles, or encryption and all that kind of stuff. But the problem for me is another. For me, the distinction, the one that I'm trying to stress in my writings, is, put it simply, bluntly perhaps, is that in the analog world, which is the reality in which we live in, counting is an option. Okay, you can count, but you can also cannot. Okay, things work without counting. The fact that you can count at a given instant the voltage flow in your analog synthesizer is a possibility.
Yes,
is not a necessity. No. Is a contingency. We can put it. But in the digital world, counting is a necessity. So effectively, no counting means no digital, nothing. Okay, the digital disappears. Now, if we take that distinction, then might be interesting philosophically speaking. But if we translate that into the art world, and that's where I get a lot of pushback, and perhaps now they'll give me a hard time on this.
I'll invite them to debate you.
The fact is that despite I'm saying these and being myself an artist that works with digital computer, I found problems with the notion of self. What do I mean by that? Now, if we take the analog world, so an analog synth, using a hammer, using a guitar or anything like this, the materiality of the real, the way I engage with the materiality of the real is a dialogue, is a way of giving back and forth, there is a kind of unmediated, non-mediable distance between me and the object to which I'm relating to.
Yes.
In the digital world, instead, everything is mediated by numbers.
It's a representation.
It's a representation of my artistic gesture. So when I press a key, when I push down a key on a digital keyboard, my gesture, it doesn't matter what's the humidity of the room, what's the weight of my finger, whether I had nails or no nails, doesn't matter at all. That push will be translated. The speed in which I depressing that key comes very
maybe aftertouch if you're lucky.
Exactly, but still is a number between 0 and 127, right?
Yes.
And so what's the problem with that? Well, the problem is that now we are ought to explain what's the relationship between me and a number. The number 2 or the number 127 does not belong to me, not as the same way it doesn't belong to you or any of us. And so, to a certain extent, the digital world anonymizes us. And what makes of us, it's a kind of in a non-dominant position towards the technology. And that's a problem, because now there are philosophical theories, aesthetic theories that nowadays go for the major, such as rhizome theory, such as the one informed by the thinking of Deleuze, or speculative aesthetics, which borrows from speculative realism, which push for removing the subject from art discourse, and so placing at the same level objects and subjects becomes what comes important is not the subject, but it's the relationship, the connection between things. Nothing wrong with these theories, but then what I'm less convinced is why should anybody engage in an art practice if it's not a way of if art is not a way of manipulating reality in order to reflect a sense of self. I think removing that kind of sense of self from art discourse is very dangerous, because then it becomes an anonymous discourse. But for who and to what end?
I would like to invite Kasper, because I think come to the mic. Because he makes a lot of digital art, so he has a lot of opinions, I guess. And I'll make some background noise with my analog drum machine. It's analog.
All right. Hi. Giuseppe. Nice to meet you
nice
today.
To meet you too.
And, yes, interesting topic, I think. So yeah, I do make digital art. I like to say it empowers me to be creative, because I learned to use it since I was a little kid. I think so. I do agree with you when you say you reduce by pushing a piano button on a MIDI keyboard. You reduce this to a number between 0 and 127. I agree, but I think there are ways around this limitation to make it interesting again. one aspect that is important, and then I will stop talking.
No, please go ahead.
Is something I learned from someone who's also in the room. One of the most important things is authenticity. So, what is the intention? Why do you push this button? And of course, if you have some sort of control over what happens when you with the data, with the number that you create, then it can become an authentic gesture. And a lot of authentic gestures together may become art, I think.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Okay.
No, absolutely. And actually, I moved this critique. Okay, let's say.
Okay.
But then I'm myself trying to find way of coming out of the impasse, which is effectively in philosophy studies it's known as the digital impasse. That kind of stuff we're talking about. And perhaps one way. So let me clarify. Even with a range as apparently limiting as between 0 and 127, the possibilities are staggering, right? Okay, so let's imagine that, if we're talking about image, you work with visuals as well, right?
Yeah, sure.
So if we take the number of possibility in a 2 by 2 square,
just
right?
Pixel.
Then you have how many images? In black and white would be 2 to the power of 4, so
16.
16, yes. 2, 4 by 2, 8, 16, sorry. Yes. Yes. 16. But if we now take even a little image such as 10, even let's say 20 by 20, right? Then the possibilities becomes huge. Now, the interesting thing in that is that potentially that huge amount of possibilities that we can get from a simple grid of 20 by 20, in theory, all the combinations would potentially give us, if we are to move iteratively from the first to the last, potentially we are representing every possible image in the universe and beyond, right? In theory. Everything that we see or not seeing, imagining, and so on. Now, but even a 20 by 20 is a staggering number, which iteratively perhaps we cannot ever do even in the life of 7 universes, right?
Okay.
So it becomes, my point is that it becomes then a way, not the importance of doing this kind of stuff, digital art live, and perhaps this is an advantage that live coder have, is that perhaps that sense of self is reflected in the moment, live, in the way those numbers appear in that specific moment here and now.
Because the coder decides, I'm gonna push this button now
and not later. And even if it's a matter of pressing enter, of pressing the number 2, that is happening now and not then.
Okay.
And so the sequence of these events that happen in this reality perhaps is a selection of infinite possibilities, which are not infinite, they're finite, but it would take the life of 7 million universes to go iteratively through them. But in that moment here and now, you are the agent that has decided to play with those numbers, and those numbers have come up to a certain extent. Now, that gives you a sense of agency.
That's a good.
For sure.
Yeah.
Yet, once the sense of self point to something a little bit different. But we are getting there, though, to a way of overcoming that kind of impasse in the life.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, yeah, what can we do with all these possibilities? When I was a little bit younger, I had this idea of actually generating all images of a 32 by 32 grid, and then patenting all the images and getting rich. But
didn't work out.
Well, Computational creativity, or like giving agency to a computer in this process, is another level of instrumentation of the digital universe, let's call it. Where I might give agency to a computer to interfere with what I am live coding or whatnot, and this can be done with sending a number to a computer. But then what happens will be, giving autonomy to a computer. I'm giving autonomy to some entity to generate the random numbers in my creative process of making music. So that's a different thing. I'm obviously talking about AI in obfuscated wordings, but what about that aspect of the digital world that is now? People are really saying AI solved this for me. Like I have a creative problem. I want this solved by you. And what do you think about the results that come out of this machines?
So what I think in relation to AI, I think it points. Okay, first of all, for me, I have a background in phenomenology, or at least, let's say, my philosophical views are phenomenologically oriented, and if you take that as a starting point, the immediate consequence is that I cannot think of objects as agents. Okay? So for me, this is an heresy. Okay? It's blasphemy. So to put it bluntly, okay? And this is why, for example, phenomenology contrasts with speculative realism and all these kind of theories. Put it simply, and here I'm paraphrasing, but this is an example I discussed with another phenomenologist, a very important person. But the bottom line is, if we cannot agree on the difference between me and you and a pebble, then we have nothing to talk about. So, because the idea of...
I'm trying to process
So, from a perspective of phenomenology, like, of course, the consciousness comes before, is more important than the capacity of acting in the world. Okay, so then if your perspective is grounded on the idea that things act, no, then yes, everything you can say that is act. This building is acting in the landscape of the city, or is acting because it's providing shelter to us, or whatever stories you want to make. But there is consciousness in things. Now, you can be a panani, what you call this? People that believe that the world has a soul and all kind of stuff, and every object has a soul. Fine, but pantheist, perhaps, yeah, panpsychist or something like this. But okay, we are diverting. So that's the first thing. Okay, but now, so going back to AI. Again, AI, and this comes back to the idea that we never start from scratch. AI is a tool that is not created by you, not by me. It's created by society in general. Might be a bunch of engineers which have worked upon the work of other engineers, and that's how basically technology grows.
Just
right?
Like the guitar.
Like
Jimi
the guitar.
Hendrix was playing.
Everything grows, right? Now, talking about those numbers, though. Okay, it's different. Now, you can have a picture of 32 by 32 and trying to iterate all the possible images into a PDF or whatever it is, whatever you want to make out of that, or whatever it is. See if it compiles first of all. I don't know. But still, the numbers AI gives us is only a portion of the uncountable numbers that we would possibly could get, right?
Yes.
So there is a decision already made by somebody. My point is simply this: by us engaging with this kind of technology, we are never starting from scratch, as we were saying earlier from Dago. We are acting onto something, onto a digital policy in which basically
Okay, but
we have
let's take the example of life.
Mhm.
It has evolved from, as we came to believe, from
cellular
organisms to what we see now. We have all kinds of life forms. They have genetically evolved, genetic programming, you could say. Genes are composed of like 4 numbers. Well, not numbers. We assign letters to them in science. So these programs will create agents that will interact with the guitar that Jimi Hendrix was holding, or with the computer that you are playing. So what's
Okay, here we go back to something we were talking offline earlier on, and I think it points precisely to what for me is the biggest problem of our world today. And the biggest problem we have is that we have forgotten to distinguish, to appreciate the difference between representation and reality, representation and essence. So our mathematical model of the world, genetic code, whatever you want to mention, okay, are models, are representation, are a way of describing reality, but there's no identity between what we represent and the thing in itself. There cannot be. I mean, somebody may prove me wrong in the decades ahead, but then we have opened another huge problem. I mean, that means that
I'll solve it for you. The mono egg twins are genetically identical. You have genetically identical people, like twins.
Yeah.
So they are the same code, but they are different.
They're
persons.
different, exactly.
We can agree on that, I think.
Yeah,
quite
absolutely.
easily.
Even because, I mean, our mathematical models, no matter how precise they can be, they will always discard even an infinitesimal, if you want, amount of noise that happens at the underlying structure of things that our mathematical model cannot account for. We were talking about the distinction between analog and digital 30, 40 years ago.
The noise was a distinction.
The noise, no, everybody was thinking, okay, people were talking actually about the noise for the analog, right? No? Or they were saying, oh, I can hear that this is a digital sample, it sounds shit, or whatever that is. Okay, no, But nowadays, we live in a world which very few people, including musicians, can tell with certainty, oh, this is a fake orchestra, or this is a real orchestra. And people don't know. Or back in the days, they were saying, oh, no, you should never buy CDs or whatever, or cassettes. No, cassettes are analog, sorry. CDs, no, whatever. No, because but then things, MP3s, right? But nowadays, there's no such a difference. But still, that doesn't mean that our representation of sound is the sound in itself. Again, so this is a mathematical model of something that is reproduced in another place thanks to technology. But that doesn't mean necessarily that that's the sound in itself as represented in the image. In the analog, when you record in an analog studio, you're not just recording the guitar, you're recording the space, the environment, the noise of the electronic equipment that is making the recording. I don't know, I'm not an expert in analog technology, but I don't know, if you choose a valve rather than another, it will give a different tone. So there are uncountable, not infinite, uncountable, that's probably the best correct word, uncountable variables that make that product. In the digital world, when you're doing digital music, you are counting. You're counting something. And yes, you can count whatever you want, but there is always a limit. Something will be left out. Inevitably, there's no other way of doing it. That's why, personally, I found paradoxical the idea that many people go in a studio, record digitally, and then they release a vinyl. But, I mean, the vinyl is made from a digital master. Either you go from the entire chain to analog.
There are
Debatable.
That's debatable. Okay.
Andrew should approach the bench side. Come on, Andrew.
Do you want to play some, take a break, or no? We keep going.
This is super
Yeah. Okay. Dun, 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 dun. There you go. That's another thing for which I get berated. Okay.
No, I'm not gonna, because I think on an emotional level I'm completely on the same side. I also feel that there's something is lost or something. But on the other hand, I was thinking about, like, for me there's no such, not for me, but I think there's no such thing as digital sound. I mean, from the moment when it comes out of the speakers, it's analog. It's just like a way of what is the basis? Is it a string that's analog? Is it an analog oscillator? Also, if you go into the electronics of analog oscillators, they are, in fact, the only real analog oscillator would be like a feedback loop. That's a very crude oscillator. It's not the typical VCO which you see in a modern modular system. I mean, the IC chips that sometimes, like for what I know, is that sometimes there's a wavetable in there, or sometimes it's also like, in a way, it's you could say it's like a form of digital. Let's say like a bucket brigade delay or something, like the analog delay. It's in fact it's kind of digital, actually. That's so for me that distinction is a little bit like because the model, yes, but to the same as with the digital picture, as on the moment that you're seeing it on a screen, you are looking on it in an analog way, in a biological way. There's no such thing as a digital image. There's that's the file, but when you project a file, it's analog. So you can make digital music, but when you start listening to digital music, you're listening to analog again, because it's impossible, because we don't have a digital interface in our brain. So for me, that's like, so what to do with, for instance, like you have the synthesizers now with FPGA oscillators, which have like a microhertz kind of sample rates. So for me, it boils down to quantization. Also, with live coding, as a jazz musician, for me, the thing, I'm a live coder too, but the thing against live coding is that you have a digital clock, that everything is clocked. And this is a quantization of time, which is for me one feel. It's practically impossible to play techno music live with live band, because the feel, the way it works, is because it's quantized in a computer way. It's impossible to play. But the thing is that the other things, the way we play with a free jazz drummer, that's impossible for a computer. So for me, the computer is just like one kind of quantized way, but which can also be like very, very creative, and actually it's very trance-inducing, which is consciousness expanding or something, or it has influences to our awareness. And so for me, there's like a big spectrum. But like also, like we were talking before, it's like when you're composing, you're actually quantizing your musical ideas to 12 notes in the Western system. So that's a quantization, and also the quantization of the universe would be like the quanta, right? Like the amount of energy. That's it. So we looked at it, and it looks like even the universe as we perceive it is quantized. So for me, the problem is that we quantize, and for us it's enough, and then we forget that all those variables are in the noise. But for me, it's in essence a quantizing problem. But yeah, that were my thoughts about.
Well, just to connect immediately to the last part of what you say, the fact that the universe may be discrete is yet to be proved. Okay, then once that will be proved, fine, we can change the tune here. But so far it's not proved. But
But the I'm talking about like the atoms when water becomes starts boiling. The electrons are going to the other.
Yeah.
The
Again,
other,
it's the same idea.
but that's discrete, right? That's not gradually. That's like it's in steps. That's a step. Like enough energy is so the electrons go to
well,
the
the
next.
step again. This is the thing that Kasper was talking about the genetic code. Like one thing is the representation of a process. One thing is the process
Yes,
itself.
The process itself. Yes.
Okay, we ought to distinguish between these two. Now, connecting instead with the earlier part of your answer or your response is that yes, once the music comes out of the speaker, it's again in the analog world, and absolutely there's the same for what we see on the screen, and therefore that's what we as musicians react to, no? Like
Yes.
to the sound that comes out of the speakers. And I have no issues with that.
And the way it interacts with the room.
Yeah, absolutely. My problem is at another level, okay? So let me just mention, so for example, this attitude that is shared amongst many artists that concentrate on the output of the digital rather than into its inner mechanics is something I labeled in my book. A book, it's called An Ethical Phenomenology of Digital Art Practices. It's published by Routledge. I published a few years ago. I call that attitude as as output essentialist. That means that the essence of art is in the output that those digital devices provide us. Now, I labeled that attitude as such just to make a distinction with a different kind of attitude, which enter my problem space. And the problem space is the fact that now, when we act, not necessarily. So when we talk about the output essentialist attitude, it's the performer and the audience sort navigate the same space to a certain extent, different ways, because of course you have to act upon your devices, but still the aura of the sound intervene. Now, another thing.
But is that what you're saying? Is that it actually matters if you start like going
matters,
back to the live coding, like starting from a blank page? That's what matters then, because otherwise you're just like focusing on the output. Is that?
That connects also, like, I mean, if we are connecting to we're listening to a music performance and we want to hear things coming out of the speakers, then of course, I mean, if performers and audience agree on that, then we definitely shouldn't start from scratch, because that wouldn't be a music performance as traditionally is intended, right? Where you want to hear sound, not seeing people typing on the screen, right? But beyond the digital output essentialist attitude, the other way of looking at things is instead into the relationship between the artist and their digital instrument prior what happens at the very end, not the music, the sound coming out of the speaker. Okay, what is the way we act upon a digital interface? Now, my claim is that we are not using gestures, artistic gestures, meaning things as any kind of aesthetic studies are always understood as with such a term, no? Like manipulating things. No, we are commanding. We are just say all the time, do this. Now, curiously, there is an interesting book by Giorgio Agamben, Creativity and Anarchy, and there is a beautiful chapter on titled "What is a Command?" And he makes an interesting point, and he says, when we do a command, the actual action of issuing a command automatically remove yourself from the consequences of its implementation. No? If I'm the king, I order you to kill him. Now, you can execute the order. Then somebody will tell, okay, I'll tell you, kill him, but don't say that I told you, right? But so eventually the consequences of that action not necessarily fall on me, right? They fall on you. You'll get to jail, you get all that kind of stuff. So there is always this removal, not between issuing a command and its execution. Now the computer doesn't have a choice, right? You have a choice because again,
Yes, of course.
you are not an object, right? You have a consciousness, so you can execute a command. If I mean the emperor, you either kill him or
of course.
tell him to kill you. So you decide if you want to survive or not. But a computer will always execute a command. How the computer executes that command is removed from you. From how I told you to kill him.
Yeah.
I didn't ask you how to kill him. The same with the computer. I ask you, play that sound. How'd you do that? Doesn't really concern me. But this idea of issuing command remove yourself from a direct consequences, and so ownership, and so this kind of back and forth dialogue, which is immersed in a noisy environment that happens in traditional art, if we want to talk about traditional art in this way, analog instrument, but I don't see happening in digital, because in the digital, again, we can make line of codes, we can use Ableton Live, or you can use terminal commands, but the bottom line is that we are manipulating numbers.
Yeah.
There's nothing else. So that's, I think, that's jeopardize the sense. No, but I don't know. Maybe I don't know if the listeners are getting bored by this.
No, anything.
This. Okay.
But the only thing I still wanted to
As
ask
we
you
get
is
into
like,
intense on the philosophical level.
how do you
Okay.
how do you see, like, in a traditional way? Then let's say you have Rachmaninoff and he writes a command list to the performer.
So
And so, how do you see then? So it's clear that the performer is an artist because he makes an interpretation. It's very human, and it's his personality. But then, how do you see, like, let's say the quantized digital like part? How do you look at it? What is it for you?
So you're talking about the difference
parts.
between scores and
Yes, like
performance.
is the score of the piano piece, is that also a piece of art for you then? Because you could see it as, let's say, a quantized representation of music.
A score is a limited set
Yes,
of
it is.
symbols,
Yes.
right? That
Like
provide
a computer program, let's say.
that provides instructions. The composers, depending, I mean, if we're talking about graphical score composers, they weren't very picky about giving
No.
correct instructions. But if you talk about Rachmaninoff, Bach, or whatever
Yes.
that is, or it's a way of notating. Okay,
Yes.
I don't think, perhaps here maybe people more expert than me can correct me, but for example, in Mozart time, music was very much improvised, right? So for Mozart, writing a score was a way of notating for himself or for students or for whoever he wants. The piece should go more or less like that.
Well, it was also
Now-
a form of registering
Yeah.
things. It was before we could make recordings, so it
Exactly.
was quite
Yeah.
quite
Now-
a thing.
Still, I don't think that the composer is a digital artist. Okay, I wouldn't classify a composer as a digital artist, even because the composer is working in a material world. I don't know, something spilled. Somebody, I give you a score, you read it, and then you spill coffee on it, and then 2 bars are gone. Whatever, I don't know.
Yeah.
Anything can happen. And of course, the way you interpret my score is different from how Dago does it, how Kasper does it, and any other many people do it. Many people come back to me with the example, and what about the alphabet, right? Alphabet is also a closed system of symbols. Well, in that case, actually, that's the worst example. It's better the score, okay, in that case, because the alphabet is not. It is a closed system, but the variability of that you have in that, again, is a way of representing sounds that we talk, but it also changes, first of all. Also, yes, you may have more combination than others, not to create certain words. It's not that every combination of letters gives you a word, but perhaps it does.
It does, or will be.
Or will be. I don't know. Language change all the time. We don't speak the English that is spoken 20 years ago, or 30, or 100 years ago, 200 years ago. People say, correctly, researchers say, that a language is alive so long as it changes, right? As long as the language doesn't change, it means it's dead. It means that nobody uses it, and therefore Latin.
Yeah,
Latin.
that's
Latin. Nobody uses it, and you study it like you use it. Well, maybe
that's true.
Well, people in the Vatican still use it.
It's
today.
resurrecting.
But people in the Vatican still uses it. So, and certainly it's not the same Latin that the Romans or in the Middle Age were using. So, in that sense, Latin is half dead.
Yeah.
Okay, not completely dead. Yeah. So, did I answer?
Yeah, it's just like it's. I think it's very interesting, but the thing is that what's the big difference for me is like between, let's say, the analog oscillator or the digital oscillator. For me, that's it's difficult to really see that there's so much of a difference, because we also came like the early analog oscillators and the new ones.
Can I give you on this example? I give you, instead of oscillator, I give you the example of valves.
Yes.
Right? Similar, just because I have a direct experience with that. Where is the difference? The difference is this. A digital valve, again, is a representation
yes.
of an analog valve.
Yes.
And if I issue a command to say, turn your cell phone to the computer, unless it's broken, it will turn it on, right? An analog valve, now this is a representation of how a valve should work, but an analog valve,
yes, will never be the same. But what the opposite? Like a granular sampler, that's impossible in the analog realm. So it's not. It's something creative. It's something new. It's impossible to make. You could say on a sampler level, yes, you had the mellotron, which was a very crude sampler, which you don't want to use. So, but sampling is like the last 30 years of electronic music is very creative. Is based on sampling, which is a pure digital technology.
And there's no question that it opens the landscape of sonic possibilities, thanks to the digital domain, has increased to the impossible. Okay, absolutely.
But I do agree that if you try to represent an analog process, you will always have an estimate, and I'm completely with you. But as an electronic musician, you see that sometimes digital tools are not available in the analog world, which is actually very creative. So, and that's what I think is I want to follow you, because I feel the same. I feel the same about these things. But for me, it's just like cognitive dissonance sometimes about like the. Okay.
Take the mic for a second. We will continue this conversation online on our YouTube channel, Dago Sondervan. If you want to continue to follow this debate. This was Wingfee for this week, and in 2 weeks I would love to invite Giuseppe again.
Oh, pleasure.
And we can also make some music together. We didn't show the examples of recordings that Giuseppe brought to us, so we have lots more to discuss and to show you. And we'll need 2 shows for this. So I'll go downstairs and make the exchange. And thank you for listening. Radio Centraal 106.7. Wingfee, programma over live coding, etc. Hoop dat u binnen 2 weken terug luistert.
Thank you.